to another episode of Messages from Beyond. I am Emma, and this is my beautiful friend Pam, who's going to assist me today in interviewing King Tut. How do you guys say it in English? His full name?
King Tut.
Just King Tut?
Well, you know, that's colloquial, of course. I understand there are at least two different ways of saying his name.
Okay.
Tutanchamun. So that's like at the top, we have to find out the correct pronunciation.
Okay.
I've heard a couple different ways of pronouncing his name. So
yeah, we say Tutanchamun in Dutch. So I don't know. I don't think it really matters because it's just another label. But I was just wondering because I couldn't pronounce it in English. I was like, how do you say it? And Gerald's like, I don't know. We just say King Tut. That's it. So I was like, I'll just ask you.
That's how I've always known him. And in fact, I was asking my Australian husband, how do you say his name in Australia? Mm-hmm. So he's, you know, worldwide, depending on where you're from, it's going to be a little different. So King Tut is the simplest way we can all refer to him.
Right.
But
we'll just use that. How about that? Otherwise, there's a lot of different difficult names probably that I don't know if I'm going to be able to pronounce what I see. So we'll just hope for the best. Just hang in there with me, guys. I'm not good with pronouncing names correctly.
No, and we have so very many of us here in this human existence today have difficult names.
Yeah.
So not just King Tut, as we'll find out in this next hour how I do on pronouncing some names here. Should be interesting. Sorry. Apologies in advance.
We're sorry.
Sorry.
Forgive us. Well, he's already here. I can feel him walking in. Well, walking in. He's kind of behind me. I can feel his energy behind me. I've been talking to him a little bit. He's not... Usually when I connect to spirits, I try to connect to him over a week here and there. Very loose kind of untied connections, just trying to get a catch of his energy. What does he feel like? Maybe sometimes little conversations pop up in my mind and so on and so forth. But I have to say he's been present. I have received here and there a little bit of communication, but he's not as open or as talkative, I'll just call it that, as many of the other entities that I've connected with. So he feels a little withdrawn, but at the same time he feels, how would I explain it? Like wise. I'll just explain it that way. Like he has this wisdom, despite the fact that I think he died at a very early age, but he has this kind of presence, this wisdom, but it feels like he's not like casual, like, hey, what's up? You know, he's not like that.
It sounds like he's very serious.
Yeah, serious, very directed in what he says, if that makes sense. So that was my experience of him over the past week. So that's what his energy to me feels like he's here and he's ready for business. But it doesn't feel like, you know, this is just for fun or, you know, and I'm used to just having fun with spirits.
Okay. He has some serious answers for us then.
I hope so. We got a lot of questions. So I had to kind of, you know, pick a bunch out or leave a bunch out because there were so many questions. A lot of them were very similar to each other. So if you don't hear your question, it might be in there, but under a different name that is very similar. Okay, guys? So let's get started. What do you think?
We're going to start, and you broke this up in great categories. We'll start, you know, with childhood and family and move from there. First of all, hello and thank you for joining us. I've been very excited to hear these answers. our first
question. He's shaking his head. Yes, he's saying thank you for inviting me to this conversation.
It's wonderful. We're, you know, so very many of us are fascinated by not just your life, but that period, that era of history, that 18th dynasty time, that new kingdom, new empire period of our history. We're so fascinated by that, and for you to join us today and answer questions about that and your life, it's very exciting. Terry Adlington has a question, and this is we're going to start right out with a bang here. She's been to Egypt. She's seen the magnificence. She wants to know, she would love to know if there were aliens, or if anyone, you or your family members, were descendants from aliens at that time.
He's saying the answer to that question is not as simple as yes or no. And as I've always been a big lover of storytelling, good storytelling. Mm-hmm. He says you have to understand, in my lifetime, storytelling was like television. It was our way of sharing past information. It was our way of sharing entertainment value. And my family loved a good story. So if it's okay with you, I would like to share an extremely complicated and misunderstood history story. But I'm going to have to do it in an extremely short and simplistic way, because we will be covering several thousands of years of history, human history, in a very short amount of time. His energy is very strong. My heart's like, dug, 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 dug. It's very powerful. He says, in order to answer your question, we have to go back to the time of early man, when men still lived as animals side by side. During that evolutionary state of mankind, visitors from the stars came to Earth in search of a new workforce that would be docile and adaptable, and that would be able to mine and provide them with gold, as it was necessary for them to save their own planet. He says, so they picked out several groups of humans and adjusted their DNA strands. They created hybrids to speed up our evolution and to speed up their functional workforce. He says, over time, we became a highly functional society, worshiping these very high demanding gods, and used their technology to create massive structures all over the world. He says, you know this human civilization as the Atlanteans. Just to let you know, he's kind of laughing. I can hear him giggle. It's kind of funny to hear a King Tut giggle. He really does have a giggle. He says, just to let you know, humans today have the timelines of history all scrambled up and have created many false facts. That aside, the Atlanteans, or Lemurians, as you guys call them, were located all over the world. And they had built pyramids around 11,000 BC all over, using the tools and the blueprints that the star people had provided them. The pyramids were built as location beacons, so the star people could orient and plan their visitation more accurately. And it was also used as ways to create energy and He's showing me, okay, he's switching. It's kind of cool, but he's showing me like, on top of the pyramid, there was something there, something that's not there now, which it looks very shiny, looks golden plated kind of thing. And he's showing me that they could send out beacons of energy light that look like a big phare, you know, one of those big lights at the movie theater, like a big jolt of light that would go up, and then they would connect outside of the atmosphere. That big jolt of light would connect with their ship, and then they could, like, it's almost like taking an escalator down. That's what they're showing me. So it's almost like there's this it's like an elevator of light where they could just go whoop, and they were here on Earth. So it's
Wow.
that's kind of fun to see. He's saying it was very amusing to see for us as well, but also very scary when they would come, because we never knew what the demands would be. He says, also understand that the continents on Earth back then, he's going back then, in my incarnation, looked very different. And so even Egypt, as you know it now, was completely different. The African continent was very fruitful. It was very green, and it had great waterways. And it had a large amount of Atlantean settlers there. But you also had the indigenous population, which were pure human, non-hybrid people, the human race that developed at its own pace. And they were very different than us. They also looked very different. And then something catastrophic happened. He says the misuse of a colossal, he's just showing me like a massive, big, like the size of, I don't know how big, but it's like massive, like several football fields. So he's saying the misuse of this kind of colossal magnetic crystal caused a massive energy surge that caused an instant polar shift. He says this created our planet to quake and created a massive floods all over. Happened all over the world, he shows me. And he's saying it reshaped all of the continents, and it reduced the human population to 1/3 of its original population. He says the survivors tried to rebuild, but all of the star technology was lost. And so with that, the star wisdom was also lost, because the amount of survivors who knew how to operate and use the knowledge was very limited. And so the African continent, after these floods, turned into a very dry, deserty location, and it damaged many of those pyramids all over the world. So he says, moving forward several thousands of years, my ancestors were descendants of those Atlantean survivors and had reestablished an order of power and superiority over the indigenous population. Now, the star people would eventually return and assist in some of the building projects. However, our self-destructive and rebellious nature caused our relationship with them to alter, and their visits kind of became less and less over the centuries. It just became less and less. And when, he says, when Akhenaten started to rule, he received a vision where he was shown that there was only one source that was all loving. And so he tried to change the worshiping of these gods by creating one new god. However, he says the settlers, they didn't understand his reasoning because he never explained why he did what he did because of his ego, because he believed that his people should just follow him without asking questions. And so he experienced resistance from them, and the only way he believed he could suppress that was a massive act of destruction and violence. And so after he died, I had to rule. I married my sister, and I was left with a revolting and a very unhappy population. I was very young, and I was easily manipulated by the advisors to restore everything to the old ways and have the people believe in their leader again. And so that's what I did. I restored a sense of balance again, and I led people to a few victorious battles because we were starting to get invaders amongst our borders. But unfortunately, my health was not great. So due to the incestuous relationships from generation to generation, hoping to keep our bloodlines pure, all of that created many problems for all of our family members physically. And so the older I became, the more problems I got with walking, started using a cane everywhere I went. But what I didn't know, he says, is that at that time, I also had an enlarged heart. And of course, we did not know that back then. You couldn't check that. So, and I love being active, you know, despite the fact that I was crippled. I love being active, and I kind of refused others to see me as weak or crippled. So I enjoyed hunting and racing with friends and family members. And I was really good at keeping up appearances. I was really good at tolerating pain. And so my wife and I tried to also produce new heirs. But unfortunately, our genetic problems caused our babies to die prematurely. And so they died in the womb. And those were very upsetting times for us, and especially my wife, because she suffered from feeling incapable of having children. She suffered because she felt like she was broken and that she was being punished by the gods. And so I distracted myself from the grief because, again, I didn't want to be seen as weak, and grieving was a little bit considered weak. I kind of distracted myself by going into battle, putting my focus on other things, he says. And so after the battle was won, I started feeling lightheaded and very dizzy. He says, as I was riding a moving carriage, I got a seizure. I fell really hard, and I landed wrong with my leg, and it broke. What I didn't know back then was that I had been affected with malaria, which caused the seizure to begin with. And so my body was not only being severely attacked by this deadly infection, but the bone break just increased the infectious state of my body, which created massive pressure upon my enlarged heart. He says, and I know this might sound weird and maybe hard to believe, but due to all the infection in the body, my heart exploded inside my chest. And this is what caused my early death. And so it was a combination of different factors that led to an explosive heart, believe it or not, he says. That's my story in a nutshell. So I might have already covered a few questions, he says, that people might have had. But if you have any more questions, I would love to.
We do. We have so many. But what an eloquent synopsis of your life. Thank you. I want to go back to this time frame. In our human existence today, age 9 is a very tender age. And we today, and again, in our human existence, our lifetime, I believe, is much longer. To live 100 years old it's not all that extraordinary. So if you would please speak a little to, in your existence at that time, was 9 years old considered a tender age to become king? You did reference your crossing over at that time as being young. What was the timelines like then? How long did people live? Were you considered too young to become king?
I was not considered to be too young, otherwise they would have not allowed me to do so. You have to keep in mind that in that time frame, most people would get married around the age of 12 to 13. Most women would start to have children at the age of 14 or 15. However, because they didn't expect, let me say it this way, he says, the average age for somebody in my position, where we had a lot of access to certain treatments, to good food, being cared for, the average age usually was around 40 to about 50, 45, 50, was about a normal age when people would cross over. Right now you're almost double that. Right.
Okay, so how old were you when you crossed over?
He's saying he was 18 or 19 is what he
Okay, so
me.
you were, so that was considered a very young age.
That was considered very young, yes. Just the way that we were raised is differently. Now, the new way of raising children, we try to keep them as childlike as possible. We try to give them a good childhood where they can be free of worry, where they do not have the responsibilities as an adult does. We were raised very differently, where as soon as you were able to speak and walk, you were already being prepared to have an adult response, to have an adult way of thinking. So the childhood was very different then than it is now. Responsibilities came immediately. Or at least the training of taking responsibilities and understanding society around you came at a very young and early age. So you grew up fast.
Yes, absolutely. Rosalind Cordero is stating that there's been a lot of debate around the identity of your mother. Who was your biological mother?
He's saying you have my family line incorrect.
Yes, there's a lot of questions about who's mom and dad and all that.
And he says, oh Lord, there come the names.
Yes, very difficult names.
I'm going to try my best to say what I see in my head. Amenophis and Amenophis. I don't know if that's right. Amenopis. I don't know. Amenophis. I'm going to go with that. He's showing me the third. Is my real father.
Okay.
He says a lot of people now think that he is my grandfather. No, he is my real father. My mother was my father's daughter, Henutanep.
Okay.
He says they both died very shortly after my birth. I was raised by my brother, Akhenaten, who raised me as a son. Akhenaten is the father figure that everybody sees me with. However, he is actually my very, very much older brother.
Interesting, because I have someone is referring to him as your father here in another question.
So repeating, he says, my father is Amenophis the third. My mother is his daughter, Henutanep. And the person I was raised with is my brother Akhenaten.
Okay, well, we need to really change the history books here.
You know, I have to interrupt. I am so, right now I'm like blushing because I did not know that they married their own daughters. Because that just, from our new perspective, that seems like such a no-no.
Well, and the health issues, it's ironic because my understanding is if we marry within our family, that's beneficial. That's the right thing to do, when in fact there were a lot of health issues from it.
Yeah, he says they were doing it to try and keep the bloodline pure, because there were not a lot of them left. And those Atlantean, he's showing me the ancestors that followed, or whoever survived, there were not many left, so they were trying to keep it pure. However, they actually had the opposite effect, and it actually destroyed their bloodline.
Yes.
It's just weird. It's just weird, like, you know, oh, I'm going to marry my daughter and have babies with her. I don't know. Anyway, sorry to interrupt people.
No, but
it's just kind of weird. It's just weird, but to them, this was normal. So he's just saying that was normal. That's how we were raised, so that it was not seen as weird or.
And brothers and sisters, you married your sister. So
yes, I married my sister. Yes.
It's amazing. What about your stepmother? Can you, Bethany Blessing is asking about her. Can you speak about your connection with her, or where her remains are, your connection with other beings on other planets, she's asking?
He says my stepmother Nefertiti,
yes,
was very, how would I describe her? He says she's very strong-minded and dominant. She was very beautiful, but she was very dominant, and she was not the kindest to her slaves, but she felt it was better to be feared than to be seen as weak. And so she used a lot of propaganda, like a lot of people do now. She says, so like a lot of people do today. We also had propaganda, only ours was chopped up in walls, to really make her look a lot good and a lot fairer than she really was. And she did love her own family dearly. She did love her daughters. She did love Akhenaten. And she did do everything she could to keep them safe. But she wasn't that fond of me. But she tolerated me because she really didn't have a choice, because I was the next in line to be ruler. He says, after my brother, or what you guys consider to be my father, we'll just call him stepfather, after he died, she tried really hard to continue the new religion that he had created. And she defended it with all her might. And she tried to make sure that I would continue it in his honor. However, other influentials saw her as a problem. And she was influencing my very young manipulative mind, and so they made her disappear. She became ill and died very shortly after that. She died very shortly after I became a ruler, he says. What I didn't know back then was that she was poisoned by those who advised me later to restore the kingdom to its old ways, as my father ruled in this way. That's what they used a little bit as a leverage your father believed in many gods, only Akhenaten didn't. So they kind of used that as leverage for me to honor my father's ideas, to honor my father's beliefs. And you also have to keep in mind that at that time, we were talking about the afterlife. We were talking about, by choosing one God over many gods, are we going to be able to continue to exist in the afterlife, or will we be punished, or what happens? Because the religion was not fully explained. It was just an idea that was starting to develop, but Akhenaten never had the time or never explained fully what happens then in the afterlife. And our people back then were very concerned about the afterlife. And he says that, so there was a lot of worry, what happens? So it's better to go back to the old ways, where we know what's going to happen to us when we die, where we know how to enter the heavenly realms and so on and so forth. We know what to do. So I was easily convinced to restore everything to the way it was. And so Nefertiti was buried next to my brother, Akhenaten. However, as time went by and after my death, their resting places were disrupted and damaged. A lot of angry people, a lot of people who wanted them to be erased from the history of the pharaohs. And so their burial places, all the riches were taken, and they were used to restore the buildings and the monuments that my brother had destroyed during his ruling. And so her body is lost, I'm afraid, and so was most of their legacy, most of their beautiful buildings and their everything that they had created was either altered after their death, after my death, or was completely destroyed and recreated in a different way. So most of their legacies, her body, unfortunately, I believe is completely lost. It was destroyed. So.
Elizabeth Farron asks, how overwhelming was it to rule as a child, and maybe speak more about what your responsibilities were. Was it overwhelming?
He says, well, I was raised with the understanding that I was going to be the next ruler in line. And so every lesson ever taught to me was, first of all, to imprint my brother's beliefs and understanding of what ruling meant. I was taught about war strategy. I was taught about history. I was taught mathematics. I was taught all about horseback riding, fighting, defending yourself, and so on. So as a very young child, it was pretty scary to become a ruler, and everyone around me. This is what happens, once you get there, that step is there, and it came a little bit sooner than expected. But once you become this ruler, everyone around you who used to be supportive and full of compliments and full of adoration became very threatening and full of pressure and demands. And so I gave them what they asked because I just wasn't strong enough to stand up against them. And I also felt very alone. And the only person that I felt supported me was my wife. Because for a very short time after I became ruler, my stepmother, Nefertiti, put so much pressure on me. Her daughters would follow her in her footsteps. So even from family members, there was constant pressure. Don't do this, don't do that. And then you had all the influentials who first were full of praises for you and all of a sudden would attack you if you wouldn't do what they said. So in that aspect, it was very scary. On the other hand, it was to be expected as well. So It's hard to explain, but you're not being raised in a way where you're free. You're being raised instantly with the knowing that you're going to have to do certain things and you're going to be responsible for certain things. So it's scary. You feel very alone because so many people seem to be turning against you all of a sudden. But at the same time, there's this knowing that this would happen. So,
yeah, it's not, you weren't plucked off a 21st century playground and now you're king.
No.
Yeah, very different.
Yeah.
Lighten it up for just a moment. Angelica would love to know, did you have pets? Just lighten it up there. Were there pets?
Yes, we did have pets. I had several cats, several dogs, several parrots, and I had one baboon.
A bamboo.
Baboon.
Baboon.
A baboon. Who was not the kindest. He would bite. He's showing me biting people. He was on a leash, and they would parade him around, and he's just showing me how, if they didn't like someone, they would just go a little closer. Yeah, that was not fun. Because he showed me he had his teeth and everything. They have big fangs.
The cats don't surprise me. Were cats, I learned always that, cats were sort of worshipped and of value in Egyptian times. Is that true?
That's true, but I believe it or they were considered to be godlike creatures, but believe it or not, I was more of a dog person. And I think because they gave me more companionship. I think that's why.
That's true today too, probably. I don't know. I can swing either way, cats or dogs, but I understand that. That's interesting that there were pets then. That was
that was very common. Pets were very common.
Maybe not the baboon today, but in your time. Very interesting. There's you spoke a lot about the pyramids and how that evolved. There's another question here about the pyramids I'd like to ask. Deborah Compton is asking, is there a power with the pyramids that we're not presently aware of?
He's saying yes, but maybe not in a way that you think. He's saying the pyramids contain much wisdom in the form of ancient scriptures and tablets explaining our relationship with these gods or star people, explaining some of their technology. And some of these were already discovered and are being kept a secret from society. Others can only be reached by really demolishing the inside walls of certain pyramids, and then the governments right now are just not willing to do that this time. And so the design, he says, of the Pyramid of Giza can be used to create a free energy source for all. So pyramids were not just beacons of transport. They were also, some of them were used to create massive amounts of energy. Free energy is what you would call it today. And so they were like energy plants. And these, that's kind of cool. He's showing me a picture like all over the world. These pyramids could connect energetically with each other all over the world, creating like a energy field that would create and produce energy, I guess.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's weird.
Vanessa Alonso, was your tomb really cursed?
He's laughing. No.
Wow.
No, not at all. That was just a rumor. that was spread to scare others off from trying to find and steal from other tombs. And also to increase the interest of people, to increase the mystery. So therefore, they would increase the revenues of their souvenir sales and things like that. It was all about attracting people's curiosity towards Egypt.
Okay. Here's one of these names again, right there. B for Sharon. Why were you buried in 3 coffins? And you were buried, apparently you were buried very quickly. And also, your tomb was hidden for 3,000 years. Was that intentional? Sorry, that's a few
He was
questions.
buried in 3 coffins? I did not know. I thought it was just...
Well, why were you buried in 3 coffins? Were you buried quickly? Why? And the 3,000 years passing before you were found.
He's saying, good question. He's saying, as I died very unexpected and in a location that was far away from my home, my body needed to be quickly embalmed so it would survive the transport home. It was not properly embalmed as the pharaoh should have been embalmed. For example, because everything went into a rush and was done by people who weren't fully skilled in the embalming process, my arms were not crossed upon my chest like they do all pharaohs. And so upon my arrival at home, I was re-embalmed. But the body did experience damage along the trip. And so they were hoping that the 3 coffins would help the preservation process because they experienced so many problems during the second embalming process. And so it was never, there wasn't a special tradition attached to it. He says it was just in the hopes to preserve the body longer. And no, it was never intentional for my tomb to be forgotten, but he says that is what happens as time passes by.
Okay. Rashmi Badwar has a question regarding the medicine and at the time of this incarnation for you. How advanced was medicine then? How would you describe how we might understand medical differences then to now?
He says, I would describe our medicine as more holistic. It was mostly based on plants, vegetables, foods. So it was very holistic. And I believe that is where mankind is going back to.
Very holistic. Okay. Stacy Terry, I would love to know how many incarnations you have experienced. Are there other forms from history where you've been a known figure, such as this incarnation we're discussing now?
He's saying, I'm experiencing over 600 incarnations. None are as intense as being a pharaoh, but are very equally valuable and expansive for the soul. So what I would like to pass on to people is that the reality that you think you know and understand is just an individual perspective created by your conscious mind, which depends on the validations of their external creations. So keep in mind that nothing is as you believe it is. The true reality is too complicated for the human mind to fully comprehend at this time. So I just wanted to share this message with everyone. Keep your heart open for the impossible, because it just might be very possible.
Okay. Are you experiencing an incarnation now then? I mean, you said over 600. Is that simultaneous or?
Yes. There is no time or space. Time and space is is an illusion. So all incarnations are happening at this moment. So I have over 600 incarnations, and that number keeps changing as we expand as souls. At this linear timeline where you are in today, I have 3 incarnations. One is as a very old oak in California. It's a very peaceful life because it's all about observation. It's not about interaction, although we do interact as trees with the energy. But it's mostly observation and finding beauty in what we see. I also have an incarnation as a little girl. At this moment, she is 3 years old, and she lives in Sweden. Hopefully, if she follows her direction and her inner path, she will grow up to be a politician at one point who will make a big, beautiful impact on the world in a very beautiful way. And then I'm also incarnated as an ant. So that's an interesting life of living for community, living for the collective, and not experiencing the individual desires and wants that some other incarnations do.
Very interesting, diverse lessons at the same.
Absolutely. He says you all do. You all are living lives everywhere, different planets. I do love Earth because the energy here is very unique. It's very dense, and it's constantly changing. It's constantly in motion, and that is fun to experience because as an incarnated soul, you are part of that change. You're part of that evolution. And despite the fact that from a human perspective, it mostly feels painful, it is actually a very beautiful experience to be a part of change and growth for an entire population.
Wow, okay. Katie Koppler would like to know, if someone were to ask you to be their spirit guide, what area of interest could you help them to grow and learn in?
He says, whatever area you feel I can help you with. As I am now in my spiritual form, I'm an all-knowing entity of light, and so all wisdom and knowledge resides within me. So I can be of assistance in whichever way or form you choose to be.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Fabiana, here's a mouthful. Here you go. Fabiana Papastefani Pazzoni.
That sounds good.
Oh, sorry if I messed that up.
I think you did good.
Okay, she is interested to know about the role of women in this society of that Egyptian time you were in. Their role, how equal or not were they to men? How are they compared to men?
That's a good question. He says, well, the answer depends on your class status. Women born in royal blood could not only rule the country, but also had many of the same basic human rights as men. However, a woman's role as mother and wife always came in first place. In the elite class women, they were allowed to have their own businesses. They could own and sell land, and they were entitled to 1/3 of the property of what their husbands owned after they passed, or if they ended the union, or what you would call a marriage. So if they requested a divorce, which they were allowed to do if the marriage was not a happy one, or if they wanted to move on to someone new, They were allowed to request a divorce and remarry someone else, and by doing so, could claim part of their husband's owned property. He says women were allowed to freely be in the company of men without being judged for it, which is in those areas in the world, sometimes even today, not allowed. He says they also had the same political and economic rights as the men. Women of lower class usually worked next to their duties as a mother and as a spouse. And most jobs were hand labor jobs, like the manufacturing of clothes, cooking, being a servant, making jewelry, making wigs. There were a lot of wig makers, making perfume, but also entertaining men and women with dance and play. So there were many, many jobs that women could do. So if you think about it, when it comes to equality of men and women, we were very far advanced, maybe even further advanced than we are today.
Which goes right beautifully to the next question. Dina Crossland wanted to know, what do you think about our modern day Egypt in our linear time?
Well, from my spiritual perspective, everything is as is the way it should be. However, I feel that the country has lost its own identity. I feel like the people residing there have lost their own heritage, and it has been stripped from them from people ruling the country. So I think equality has disappeared. There is much more poverty than there used to be. Of course, we had slaves, which is a good thing that we no longer have. But if you think about it, the people now are enslaved by their government. And that on its own is also a very sad thing. So I believe that in the future, the population or the people residing in Egypt will have to find a way to start working together, because there's a lot of, it almost feels like there's a lot of different groups that are very separated from each other and that do not have the best interests for all people in Egypt. It feels just like there's separation and division going on, and that's creating turmoil and lots of criminal activities, lots of poverty, and so on and so forth. So it is as it should be, because people can only grow when they get confronted with their own flaws, he says. Mm-hmm. But I believe that there will be a time where Egypt will flourish again, he says.
Just again, to lighten up here, and I think it's a great question that Anne Maltese wanted to know, what did you do for fun?
Well, I loved playing with little boats as a young child. I loved the water. And so I had these, it looks almost like wooden carved boats, very nicely carved, and he would play with that in the water. He says, I also, as I got older, I enjoyed hunting and I enjoyed playing with board games. He says, despite the fact that I had trouble walking and I couldn't really participate, I did enjoy watching other people compete in ball games. It looks like he's just showing me, like, it almost looks like a soccer ball, kind of. And they're just kind of chasing it back and forth. So I enjoyed music. I enjoyed watching people dance. And I really enjoyed board games. That's what.
What was the, so can you say more about the music? What were the instruments like I mentioned? They were a bit different than we have today.
He says they had a lot, there were flutes. He's showing me like some kind of flute. It looks very different in my head, so I'm not sure if I have the right name. It looks like they had some kind of drums with it. It's very similar to ours. It just looks like it's differently made.
Yes.
And they also had like a string instrument. That's what it looks like. They would sing as well. He's showing me singing, and then there were ladies that would dance, do specific dances. They also had plays, so it's almost like they would perform theater. He's showing me doing like theater in some way or form. Yeah.
Good times. Had some fun.
It's very similar to us. It just, the instruments just look differently made, but it looks like a string instrument, almost like a banjo kind of thing. And then he's just showing me some kind of drums, and then lots of different kinds of flutes.
The people that engaged in musical activity, were they of a certain class?
A lot of times it would be what you would consider the working class. Usually the elite or the upper class, and then the royal family would just be observants.
And did you ever have the desire to engage in music in any way?
I really wanted to dance, but it was hard for me.
You had the bone, did you have some sort of a bone disease where your bones were very fragile? I think I'd heard that once. Could be inaccurate history.
He says, I didn't have fragile bones, but I had a deformity or in his foot. It almost looks like there were parts of the bone missing.
Okay.
But he's making me feel like he was born that way. It didn't hurt as much when he was very little, but as he grew older and the heavier the weight that was placed upon the foot became bigger, it started to hurt more and more.
Okay. So dancing wouldn't be a lot of fun.
It was, if you can call this dancing, he says. He's just doing this. He would move with the music, but he couldn't dance.
Okay.
It wasn't possible. Too painful.
Is there anything else, any other message that you would like to convey to our viewers today?
He says, I think my biggest message was already shared, that when we start to believe in the impossible, then the impossible starts to show itself to us. I think that's the biggest message, and also to understand that mankind, that all mankind did not develop and evolve in the same way. That's why we have such variety at this moment. That's why there's always been this energy of racism and separation, because on a subconscious level, we can feel the alternate DNA. We can feel that our energies are not similar, despite the fact that we are all human. The energy sometimes resides. However, it is very important to recognize and embrace each other's values and each other's differences, so we can then learn from each other and grow as a population and move into a very positive, compassionate direction for our future. A lot of people and entities will say there are no differences, but I disagree, because every individual is unique. If we can embrace that difference, he says, then we will be unified through our differences as one.
That's beautiful. That's not.
Let's hope. Yeah, but he's right. I think what he says, it resonates with me, because we're all trying to be the same. We're all trying to be equals. But if you think about it, it's impossible to do that, because we all are very unique beings who create their own unique reality and their own unique universe. And we are co-creating part of that. Mm-hmm. But overall, our experience of our life is a very unique experience. And I'm the only one who experiences my reality, and Pam, you're the only one who experiences your reality. So instead of trying to all be the same and all trying to fit in and mimic each other or mirror each other, we should do the opposite and see the differences, so we can then also see the beauty of that person. Mm-hmm. So I can see the difference in who you are compared to me and embrace that beauty as being your uniqueness, your unique self. And if we can find love and compassion and acceptance for those unique qualities, those uniqueness energy that you send out to the world, then we can find acceptance for everyone. And in that acceptance, we can co-create a world of acceptance.
That's it. That, for me, in my opinion, is exactly it. That we love and honor our differences rather than judge or hate or disapprove differences, but that we look to honor those differences and find the value of those differences. Co-create.
All right. Well, okay, people. Thank you for joining us another time. We got Jesus coming up next. Oh my God. I'm really nervous for Jesus, because I never grew up with religion and I've never read the Bible. So hopefully.
Oh, you're still recording.
I'm still recording. Hopefully I don't know. Hopefully I resonate with what he says, because I do have to resonate with what they're saying to make it understandable. So hopefully that works out, but I'm a little nervous about that. But I won't have a filter, because I really don't know anything about it.
But that's the best, not to have any,
Yeah. I was just raised with parents who never went to church. I never did my communion. We never talked about religion at all. So it was just not part of my raising. So, well, Pam, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here again, for asking the questions.
My pleasure.
Thank you for being my friend. And I love you.
Love you too.
And to everybody who's listening, I love you guys. Have a great Christmas, and I might be able to squeeze into Jesus' interview before Christmas. I'm going to try. And just have fun. Love yourself. Be bright. Stay in the light. And we'll see you guys later.
See you later.
Bye.